Hello, and welcome to I Know Dino, the Big Dinosaur podcast, where we cover news, interviews, and discussions of all things dinosaur.
Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today's episode is brought to you by Artemisia Publishing. They not only publish award-winning dinosaur books, but also coloring puzzles, which can be put together and then colored using markers, crayons, or colored pencils. You can get more information at apbooks.net. This week, we have an interview with Jesse Pruitt. Our dinosaur of the day is Einiosaurus, and we have a bunch of dinosaur news.
Before we get into that, we want to thank our patrons from Patreon at the $5 level. So big shout out to Scotty, Jackson, and Megan. You guys are awesome, and we really appreciate your support. And if you would like to join these special people on this tier or other tiers and help support our podcast, then please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/iknowdino.
Yeah, we're still planning on sending everybody stickers when we get to the $200 mark. And we're getting close. We're at $135, I think, right now. So $65 more and everybody gets a sticker who's a patron, even if you're only at a $1 level. So feel free to join.
Yep.
So jumping right into the news, I want to go back to SVP real quick because there are so many stories from SVP. And one really interesting one was by Struble and others. Struble was the one who presented it. And it's about raptor feet. And specifically, they were very quick to say, we're talking about the birds and not the non-avian dinosaurs. Although there are non-avian dinosaur conclusions that you might be able to draw if you are creative. So the tricky thing is that historically raptors have been hard to define since they come from three different taxonomic groups. So they kind of evolved three different ways. And really what people are usually talking about when they talk about raptors are birds that prefer using their feet to attack than their mouths. So if you think of like a hawk diving in with its talons out versus, say, like a seagull, which goes in with its beak, is kind of the difference there. And it makes it a little bit easier to qualify which things are raptors when you look at their behavior. And they showed a couple of birds that both ate snakes, which was just an awesome demonstration. There were two videos, and they looked very similar. They both had really long legs, and they had similar proportions and things. And one of them attacked it kind of how you'd expect a bird to. It ran over to it, and then it pecked it, and kind of killed it with its mouth. The other one ran over and just started kicking it.
Wow.
It just kind of kicked the snake to death. And so that would be the characteristic of a raptor. So it's preferring its feet as kind of its weapon or its tool or whatever. So like a crow wouldn't be because they use their mouth to use little tools and stuff like that. So ultimately, the researchers looked really closely at the differences in feet between raptors and birds that prefer their mouth. So what they ended up finding was that the way their feet looked actually changes depending on what they use their feet for. It's not really too surprising. So those birds that didn't perch tended to have longer toes, and raptors tended to have kind of more even toes. I think there's a technical way to say it, but a couple of the digits are reduced, and it just gives kind of a different look to the foot. And then on top of that, animals with very specific diets tended to have specific features too, like the birds that ate fish tended to have an extra flexible toe so that they could grab onto slippery prey better because it's all squirmy and you need your toes to be more flexible. And they're hopeful that they might be able to use this research to determine what kind of diets dinosaurs had, because even if all you have is a footprint or a fossilized foot, if you know that there's this characteristic relationship between toe size and what they eat, you might be able to figure out a little bit about their behavior just from their foot. So, pretty cool.
I wonder what's messier, killing prey by beak or foot?
I would definitely prefer foot.
I would, yeah.
Because whenever you're going in with your face, it's like, it's kind of a sensitive part of the body.
If your beak's big enough, though, it's kind of far from the rest of you, of your face.
That's true. But like you're going after a snake, do you want to like lunge at a snake face first? I think I'd rather kick at it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
The beak probably has more precision.
Yeah, I don't know. Those hawks and things with their talons are pretty slick.
That's true.
But anyway, it's hard to say with dinosaurs. Hopefully they can come up with some kind of correlation so we can get more details about what they eat. Next up, Lita Xing and others, including Scott Persons, who we interviewed a while back, have re-examined a set of tracks from southern China. And these tracks make up the, quote, largest late Cretaceous dinosaur track assemblages in South China, end quote. So the really interesting thing is that there's a lot of diversity in the tracks. It's mostly ornithopods. There are about 30 large and small tracks, and both of those have 3 wide toes, and they've been assigned to Hadrosauropods, which is an ichnotaxa for a hadrosaur. And you might remember from our episode where we talked about ichnology, ichnotaxa is a dinosaur or other animal group that's named based on a trace fossil. So in this case, it's literally that footprint is named after the species, basically, rather than a bone. You can do it based on a footprint, too. So we're not sure exactly which hadrosaur it came from, but we've seen these types of tracks before. There are also a couple of theropods. One was possibly a wading bird, and then the other one is a 2-toed track that looks a lot like a dromaeosaur or raptor foot, but it might just be a poorly preserved 3-toed track where like one of the toes didn't get preserved. I'd like to think it's a dromaeosaur because those are exciting. And then there was just a single pterosaur print. And pterosaur prints are usually really interesting because they have the footprints and then they have the kind of hand at the end of the wing prints. But since there was only a single print, it was just one of the feet. So pretty cool. It's a very interesting combination of animals, and they think it's from a late Cretaceous lake shore, which is also pretty interesting that all these animals are kind of hanging out on the beach.
Living the life.
Hopefully not getting eaten.
That's true, if we only know the tracks.
Yeah, and they're all jumbled up. If you look at them, it doesn't look like anything at all. It just looks like a random pile in all different directions. So I'm sure it was over the course of many days or even years, because it's all mixed up.
Cool. Next up is some kind of sad news. So the Philip J. Currie Museum, which we visited back in July, and we made a short video about our visit, and we talked about it a lot. They're having some financial problems, according to CBC. Though they had 120,000 visitors during the first year of being open, which was this past year, they don't think it's a sustainable number of visitors, and they also don't receive any government funding, and their fundraising efforts have not been as successful as they'd hoped. So they've had to spend a lot of money on travel and training and conferences to promote the museum, because, as we talked about, it's in Grand Prairie, Alberta, which is very much in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's way, way north. North.
Yes. And unfortunately, their efforts have only led to a handful of people actually visiting. And in this past October, they had to let go of their CEO, George Jacob, even though he had 9 months left on his contract, and they're not even looking for a replacement until spring since winters are so slow. They've also let go of some other staff, including their gift shop manager, and they're not going to replace that person. Eventually, they do plan to hire marketing and fundraising coordinators, so that's something. Next year, they will put on display 7,000 fossils from a local man who recently passed away, and that's to promote the kind of stuff that you can find locally because he had found the bones around Pipestone Creek, which is right there, basically. In happier news, according to a separate CBC article, Philip Currie will lead a dig at Pipestone Creek, and he'll be looking for a complete Troodon dinosaur. There's a lot of teeth that have been found in the area, and no complete specimen of Troodon has been found yet, and that dinosaur was described back in 1856. The Grand Prairie region, which is where Pipestone Creek is, has been the site for lots of bones of small lizards and mammals, so there's hope for finding small dinosaurs. And Currie will be working with 6 to 15 other researchers, including paleontologists from China.
Cool. That's kind of like what was going on when we ambushed them last time.
Yeah, so hopefully they find what they're looking for, and maybe that'll attract more visitors to the museum.
Yeah. I'm surprised they're talking about Troodon since when we were there, all they were talking about was ceratopsians, because that's kind of the main thing that they find in Pipestone Creek. I wonder if they found a little bit of a Troodon, but they don't want to say it.
Maybe.
And then they're going to excavate the rest of it and hope to find the rest of the body.
Yeah, hard to say.
Next up, thanks to Patrick for sharing this with us on Facebook. The creative director of the original Walking with Dinosaurs TV show and the producer of the Walking with Dinosaurs arena show are leading the effort for a new dinosaur show. And we loved both of those, especially the arena show. It had some of the coolest dinosaur animatronics I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
The new show is going to be called Dinosaurs in the Wild, and apparently it has been in the works for at least 5 years, and they've now got over 100 specialists working on the project. So it's quite an undertaking. And the new company running it is called Immersive Escapes Limited, and their goal is to make a 70-minute show that, quote, blends museum-accurate science with the excitement of a theme park, end quote. So that sounds pretty cool.
It does.
And it sounds actually a lot like Walking with Dinosaurs. I wonder what the difference will be. I know the kind of theme of Walking with Dinosaurs, at least the arena show, was a guy went back in time and kind of narrated it. So maybe since this one's called In the Wild, it'll be a little bit more, dinosaurs only, not with the dude in the middle of it. That could be nicer, potentially. They've said that they have a lot of very talented puppeteers and CGI creators working on the project. So I'm sure the show is going to be really awesome. And they're planning on opening in June 2017 in Birmingham, and then it looks like they're going to move to Manchester and London, although on their investment website it references opening, quote, identical attractions all over the world, end quote, as well as the potential for adding rides. So I'm not sure if they're thinking of making a more permanent presence somewhere, because if you're going to have like rides, it's kind of difficult to travel with that.
I don't know. You have county fairs have rides.
Yeah, but those are pretty janky rides.
Yeah.
If you want like a good ride.
We don't know what kind of rides they'll have.
I suppose so. I guess it could just be like one of those 3D movie things that would be pretty portable, probably fit in a semi-truck or something. But I don't know. Maybe it'll just be several traveling exhibits, or maybe there'll be a few more permanent ones. We'll have to see. Hopefully we don't have to go to England to see it, because I want to see it, and that's far.
Yeah, well, might have to make a trip there anyway.
I guess so.
Speaking of traveling exhibits, the Duchess of Cambridge, also known as Princess Kate, recently visited the Natural History Museum in London to say goodbye to Dippy before the Diplodocus goes on tour. And she made these dinosaur egg-topped pencils with students from an elementary school nearby, and then told them that her son Prince George loves dinosaurs and that his favorite is T-Rex because it's the, quote, noisiest and scariest, end quote. And they also ate a Dippy-shaped farewell cake, so.
They ate it?
Probably. Well, they cut into it. I'm sure they ate it after.
Poor Dippy.
It's okay. Dippy was right there watching.
Oh, does that make it better?
I think so. It was in Dippy's honor.
I guess so. I guess it's kind of like when you have a picture of a person on a cake and then you eat it. That always feels weird too.
Yeah.
Next up, there's an article on Engadget asking the question, why are dinosaurs everywhere in VR? And it's certainly true. There are a lot of VR dinosaur demos, and probably at least a quarter of the content that I've downloaded or watched on the Rift has dinosaurs in it, although I realize that I'm not exactly the average consumer, and it's probably a little more dinosaur heavy in my case. There is a ton of dinosaur content available. So the article talks about how the main reason is that they have a, quote, epic sense of scale, end quote, and I definitely think that's a big part of why they're so attractive for VR. I mentioned back when I talked about the Dinosaur Island VR game that it's basically just a tour of Jurassic Park where you kind of walk around and there isn't a ton of interaction going on, but it's still really fun even though it's so simple because you get that sense of scale right when you're next to a dinosaur. So I do think that's really valuable also. And since dinosaurs are extinct, it's obviously the only way where you can really experience them up close, because unlike going to a safari or something, you could see an elephant up close, but you can't see a Brachiosaurus up close. So all that reminded me that Saurian is supposed to be coming out soon, potentially with VR, although maybe not at launch. I hope it's at launch because I want it. And I checked the current status of their development, and they still say they're expecting to release on Steam Early Access in the first quarter of 2017.
It's coming up.
Yeah, so that would be March or earlier. And I hope that happens because I want it so bad. Also in VR news, there's a new video posted by the American Museum of Natural History on YouTube called Fossil Hunting in the Gobi 360, and it follows Roy Chapman Andrews' expeditions through Mongolia and the Gobi Desert. And apparently there is a lot of footage of this, which is surprising because it was pretty early in the 1900s when he was going around collecting things. But they did have a cameraman with them, and apparently, at least according to the video, it was a huge-scale project with over 100 camels and 40 scientists on the Central Asiatic Expeditions, is what it was called.
Wow.
And it was also one of the first expeditions that used vehicles. They had tons of Jeep-like vehicles, off-roading vehicles and stuff that were constantly getting stuck trying to drive around on the dirt. They found lots of dinosaurs, early mammals, and other prehistoric life. And the VR itself is this crazy collage style thing where it's kind of a big background picture, like a 360 picture kind of thing. And then they have these videos fading in and out around it. So it's like a collage, but it's constantly changing. And then you never really know where to look because there's always videos popping in and out all around you.
1 second there's a camel, another second it's people.
Yeah, it's pretty weird. But it actually works pretty well. And the only thing that's a little bit strange about it is that it's all in sepia and black and white. So it doesn't really feel that immersive because obviously in real life, nothing's in black and white. So it's kind of strange. But
Or does it feel like you're time traveling?
well, I mean, I assume that if I went back to the 20s, everything wouldn't be in black and white.
We don't know how time travel works.
I guess so. But in the VR experience, I think the best part is when they describe accidentally finding the flaming cliffs, and they kind of superimpose a video of the paleontologist on top of the cliff in the distance above an actual 3D photo of the flaming cliffs. So it kind of has the feel like you're actually there watching them discover it. So it's definitely worth watching. I think it's only like 3.5 minutes long.
And you don't need VR to watch it. Since it's on YouTube, it's a 360 video. So we'll post a link so you can see and you kind of click around to move things around.
Yeah, you drag around like you're doing a virtual tour of an apartment or something. It's a lot more fun in VR, though. And Google Cardboard is really cheap. So if you don't have it, you should get it.
Last in the news, Kyle Sinclair, a rugby player, told ESPN that when he was a kid, he thought he was a dinosaur. Which, I know there's a lot of kids who pretend to be a lot of different animals. Got a cousin who pretended to be a cat for a while.
I don't think I ever pretended to be a dinosaur. Probably should have.
Maybe a different animal. So he said, quote, "I used to run around eating leaves. I swear to you on my life," end quote. And he said he used to eat bushes and leaves, but then he realized that he liked meat. I'm wondering if he ever thought about being a carnivorous dinosaur. I was like, no, definitely have to be an herbivore.
Yeah, that's pretty odd considering there are plenty of dinosaurs that eat meat. He could have just eaten it like, more aggressively without using a knife or something and pretended to be a dinosaur.
Maybe he thought he would have had to have eaten raw meat or something to pretend to be a carnivorous dinosaur.
It could be. I guess most of the heroes in dinosaur kid stories are herbivores. Usually the bad guys are the carnivores.
That's true.
Before we get into our interview, we have another word from our sponsor, Artemisia Publishing. And we want to talk a little bit about their dinosaur learning activity book. So as an activity book, it's pretty big. It's on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper bound into an 84-page book. It won the 2010 New Mexico Book Award as their children's activity book. And it was written by the publisher who we met, who is Jeff. And he's a paleontologist with a degree in geology. And he studied paleontology at the Museum of the Rockies with Dr. Jack Horner, who we talked to a while ago and everybody knows. He also has been on digs in Montana and South Dakota, and he's worked as a fossil preparator on cast fossils of both Tyrannosaurus rex and Triceratops. So he's well-versed in the things that he's writing about and drawing about.
Definitely.
So the Dinosaur Activity Book has matching puzzles, mazes, connect the dots, and coloring pages that help you learn about dinosaurs and geology and kind of encourage kids to get more interested in science.
It's a pretty big book, too. It's got over 75 pages of dinosaur material, so it's great for use in classrooms or if you want something to do on a rainy day or you've got a long trip in the car.
Definitely the thing, though, that sets this book apart is that there's a big effort to make the dinosaurs scientifically accurate and portraying them in a world that is accurate to the time. There aren't grasses everywhere and things like that you often see in dinosaur books, or T-Rex standing upright like Barney. I mean, even now, coloring books are just rife with tons of scientific inaccuracy because nobody scrutinizes them and, who cares? But I think it's actually super important because that's one of the things that kids see first when they're looking at dinosaurs and getting interested in them. And if all that stuff's inaccurate, then that's no good.
Yeah. What I like about the coloring aspect, too, is that, we don't know too much about the colors that dinosaurs were.
Yeah,
and so
true.
You get to, it's as anatomically correct as we know it so far, and then you can make it bright pink or whatever you want.
Yep. And in most cases, you could be right. So if you want more information on the Dinosaur Learning Activity book or their coloring puzzles or any of the other books, you can head over to apbooks.net.
And now we have our interview with Jesse Pruitt, the scan tech at the Idaho Virtualization Lab. We're here today with Jesse Pruitt, digital preparator at the Idaho Virtualization Lab and technology specialist at Idaho State University. The Idaho Virtualization Lab is a research unit of the Idaho Museum of Natural History on the campus of Idaho State University, and the lab educates, researches, and provides informatics, which is information science, to social and natural sciences, and they do this through virtually archiving museum collections, fossils, and other items so that anyone can access specimens and collections for research. And Jesse also does data acquisition and processing, web distribution, and makes 3D models of fossils. And he's also a paleontology modeler and animator. So how did you first become interested in dinosaurs?
As probably your average American child, I grew up loving dinosaurs. Had dinosaur books and flashcards and stuff like that when I was a kid. I grew up in rural Mississippi, so wasn't a whole lot of dinosaurs to be found there, but I would go out fishing and find fossils along the banks of the rivers there. So it's just something I've had with me my whole life.
Cool. So then what led you to this more tech side of things with the scanning and 3D modeling?
Oh, that's a long story. Ultimately, it was an injury on a job. I was working as a mechanic and got injured and ended up tearing my rotator cuff and wasn't able to do mechanical work anymore. So I went back to the university as pretty much a last resort to try and find myself a better job. And then when I went there, I met with a professor. I was going to be an archaeologist because Idaho State University doesn't offer paleontology as an undergrad track. So I was going to do archaeology because it's fairly close and I'm kind of interested in that world as well. So I met with a professor and he just happened to be a director at the Idaho Museum of Natural History at the time. And he chatted with me for a bit and realized that I really wasn't interested in that. I was more interested in fossils. So he put me into contact with the collections manager in Paleo. And then I interned there for a few years. And then through a research project, I got into the 3D technology, working on the Helicoprion shark. So that was my first dive into the digital realm, was that shark and processing CT data.
Cool. Yeah, you sent us a link about that, right? And putting together that exhibit.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about that experience and your role specifically for that?
Sure. It was, it started as an undergraduate research project. I was told, if you want to get into grad school, you need to have some research under your belt to help you set you aside from the rest of the applicants. So I picked Helicoprion because at the time it was very little was known about it other than, it was a shark and it had this weird spiral of teeth. So I set about trying to figure out how that whorl spiral of teeth grew. And that was the main basis of it. So I did a bunch of measurements and analysis. I think I looked at about 70 specimens of that.
Wow.
Measuring all the teeth and measuring the spiral and just a whole lot of numbers. And we figured out that there were 3 distinct species of helicoprion. We figured out how they grow. You can tell in the spiral of teeth how they change ontogenetically as they age. And then from there, the next step was to figure out how that whorl fit into the animal. That was the big question with that shark for over 100 years. And naturally, the only way to do that was through CT technology. So we have a specimen in our collection that's really well preserved. You can see the jaw material expressed on the surface of the rock. So we took that to Austin, Texas, had it CT scanned, and then I spent about 4 months processing that CT data. That was a manual process. That was one slice at a time. I would go through and hand paint the material I could see, because the fossil itself is fossilized in a phosphatic concretion. So there's very little density variation between the fossil itself and the rock. So it was a manual process of painting that fossil one slice at a time over 4 months to extract the data from the rock.
Wow.
Then once we did it, we figured out that the whorl occupies the entirety of the lower jaw, which is something that had been hypothesized back in the 60s, but was never confirmed up until that research.
Yeah, because there are some other versions of that skull where it kind of sticks out of the mouth too, right?
Yeah, the leading hypothesis up to that point was that it spiraled under the lower jaw, so the teeth grew out of the mouth and just sort of hung out below it, which is pretty inefficient for an animal that's evolved to be very smooth and hydrodynamic in a way that prevents fish from being able to detect it. So that really wouldn't work out too well for an animal.
Could it close its mouth with that huge thing in there?
It could, yeah. So the top of the mouth sort of looks like a hard shell taco. It's got a nice big deep cavity that the whorl just slides right up into. And then there's 2 different mechanisms in its jaw that prevent the teeth from coming into contact with the upper jaw. It's actually got a strut that comes up and supports it from the side that wedges it from the side. But there's also at the back of the jaw, there's a little process. It's called the Pruitt process, because I found it.
Awesome.
That prevents the jaws from touching. There's a process comes off the upper jaw that abuts with the lower jaw that stops it.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah, that's one of the most interesting looking prehistoric animals, I think.
Yeah, it really captures the imagination. It's really fun to, here at the museum, we'll give kids a quick little rundown of the research we've done. Then we'll show them the spiral, and we'll have them reconstruct the animal, how they think it would happen. And it's pretty fun to see what they come up with.
Yeah, that's cool.
So you mentioned CT scans. What other kind of tools do you use for the Idaho Virtualization Lab?
The bulk of our work, we do surface scanning, so we primarily rely on laser scanning technology. We've got a couple of articulated arm laser scanners. We have a terrestrial LiDAR unit that we use for mapping big sites or really big objects. We scan whales and stuff with the LiDAR unit. We have a couple of turntable-based laser systems, so if we've got just a lot of material we need to crank through really fast, we can put the objects on a turntable, and it's kind of an automated process. We do a bit of structured light. We've got a handheld structured light scanner, which shoots out a pulsing light with a grid pattern in it. And then that has a couple of cameras, and it detects how the grid deforms over the surface. And then we do photogrammetry. We can process CT data, MRI data. We have a scanning electron microscope on campus. We use that to a degree or two for very, very small objects. And then hand modeling, we do quite a bit of that too. So.
Wow, that's a lot of things.
Yeah, we try and really cover all the bases and make sure that we can provide any service that a researcher would need.
So is there kind of a process you follow for each specimen, or is it just kind of case by case depending on what you have and what you need?
The workflow is pretty much consistent across everything we do, but there is a bit of case by case. Fossils vary quite a bit in their surface color and detail and texture. So if we have a fossil that's really black, like a lot of the material coming out of the Cleveland Lloyd dinosaur quarry in Utah is really black, and the lasers are designed to not detect black, they're designed to pick up white. So we have to calibrate our lasers to detect black, which can be kind of problematic. In fact, we've had, over the years, the people that make the technology have told us to just paint our objects white. Well, we can't very well paint a fossil. It's like, so we need to be able to detect black objects, and they don't like that too much. But so it's basically the same. The basic workflow is you scan the object and you scan it as many times it takes to capture the entire surface, and then you flip that object, you scan it again until you capture that surface, and then inside the software you stitch those two pieces together to create a full object, and then you create a full surface 3D model. That's pretty consistent across all of the technology, with the exception of CT processing, but photogrammetry, laser, structured light, LiDAR, all works essentially the same.
Do you do a lot of LiDAR, like when they first discover a quarry or something, or when would you use the LiDAR?
We got the LiDAR unit specifically to scan really big natural history objects like whale skulls and stuff like that. But since we have it, we do go out. I took it to Alaska 3 years ago, I guess now. I was in there out in the field for 7 weeks doing some archaeology work. And we used the LiDAR to map an entire island. So I just walked around the island when the sun was out and it was a nice day and mapped that entire island with the LiDAR. And then as we were digging, I would go into an area, scan it before we'd dig, and then every time we'd open a new layer, I would take a new scan so that now we can digitally reconstruct that dig in 3 dimensions and peel away layer by layer. And as we were recording the material we were finding, we subsequently laser scanned all that material. Now we can take those 3D objects and place them stratigraphically back in their columns, and you can pull it apart virtually. But we do a lot of terrestrial material, a lot of really big objects with it. We've scanned mountainsides that have petroglyphs on them. We've done a bit of that. And then most recently, our lab manager just went out and digitized a series of caves here at the Craters of the Moon National Park here in Idaho for search and rescue operations. So if somebody gets lost in a cave, now we've got a 3D model of that cave. People can look for where somebody might have potentially gotten stuck or something like that.
Interesting. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun to see the data. I'm glad I wasn't part of that. Bob, our manager, spent about a week on his belly crawling through these caves with a $80,000 3D scanner.
Did he get stuck at all?
He said there was a couple of times he got wedged pretty good, but he never got stuck, fortunately.
I could see you're trying to scan things in places where someone might get stuck so that you'll know if they get stuck and then you get stuck.
Yeah, I'm glad I wasn't part of that project.
Yeah.
Not much care for tight spaces.
Yeah, it's not good for claustrophobia.
So it's an ongoing project, right? The research quest with the Natural History Museum of Utah. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a really fun project. Madeline Runberg is their educational coordinator for the museum there, and she had an idea to get kids more involved in critical thinking at a younger age, so she came up with Research Quest. So I went down to their museum, I digitized a bunch of their dinosaur bones, and now they've got these digital models that they go to a website and has built-in measurement tools and comparison tools, and you can compare one bone to another and things like that. So now kids are given a series of bones, and they're doing measurements just like a paleontologist would. They're measuring length and width, and you can measure volume and things like that inside the 3D models to build a small database of known specimens. And then they're given mystery bones. So they're given a bone that they don't know what it is. There's no information associated with it. So they take a series of measurements of that, and then they try and figure out what that bone is based on how it compares to the known measurements they've done. And they've had some really great success teaching kids critical thinking skills doing that. And it's a fun way because they're playing with dinosaur bones, so they don't really think about the math involved.
Definitely. So is this something kids have to go to the museum to do? Because it's on an app, right?
No, it's so they built this service, so I think they've opened it up nationwide now, but it was just in Utah. But you can do it right from their school, so you can integrate it directly into a lesson plan at any school, anywhere in the state. So teachers get a login credential, they log in, and then they can have their students log in on iPads, I think is how they have it set up, so that they can do all these measurements there. But yeah, and pretty much anybody in the country can have access to that research tool.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really fun project. It's great, and it's really rewarding to see it positively affecting the kids. And, it's dinosaurs, so they get to have fun with it.
Exactly. So, yeah, and we'll be sure to post links to everything on our website, too, so our listeners can check it out. So how long has the Idaho Virtualization Lab been around? 14
years this year. We're almost 15 years. It was started back in 2002.
Wow, and about how many people work there?
Anywhere from 8 to 10 people at any given time working there.
Cool. So what's the most interesting thing that you would say you've worked on?
Oh, that's a tough question. The Tiktaalik Project was a pretty important one for me. I felt like that was kind of a highlight of my career, being able to digitize that iconic fossil and being able to work with it so closely. But we do quite a bit of really fun stuff. We just recently helped an Idaho county here on a cold case murder investigation. That was pretty interesting. It's not something we do very often, but they bought us a box of remains that we digitized and virtually reconstructed the skeleton. And we were working with a forensic anthropologist, sort of like Bones on TV. She looked at the bones after we had them together and was able to determine that the guy had a back disorder and a hip disorder. So he would have walked with a limp and had kind of a hunched posture. So the sheriff's department was actually able to ID those remains for the first time.
Wow.
Based on the description she gave from the bones that we were able to put back together for him. So that was kind of fun. But we do quite a bit of weird stuff.
Yeah, a lot of variation there. When you first said murder mystery, I was thinking like Cleveland Lloyd Quarry and how that's described. But no, you mean modern.
Yeah, modern. It's not all fossils there.
I just want to go back to the Tiktaalik and that project, and you scanned and modeled this entire collection of material that was collected in Nunavut. So how much can a 3D scan tell you about a fossil?
So the one thing that we can't do is it's all surface data. So we don't get any of the internal structures. So that's the one big difference between CT scanning and laser scanning, is that we only collect surface data, which is good enough if you're doing morphometric analysis. You can do landmark analysis and stuff like that. But the scanners that we use in the lab are capable of I can push them to about 16 micron resolution, which is, that's better than you can see with your naked eye.
Yeah.
Surface detail. So I can pick up, if there's a detail on the surface, I can capture that. So you're not losing anything. They're 100% accurate to scale. So once I've created a fossil, the measurements are going to be as accurate as you could do, with the specimen in hand. So essentially what we create with these scans is we call it a digital surrogate. It's a 100% accurate to scale to detail representation of a real world object that can be researched and things like that.
Cool. So what happens between scanning and then putting it up on Sketchfab or your website?
So that depends on the application of the person that's requesting the digitization. But the basic process is you scan an object, then so that generates a point cloud data similar to what you would see with LiDAR. So it's just a bunch of points. So that has to be surfaced. So then you surface the model, which turns it into what we call a watertight or manifold 3D model. And then from there, it gets cleaned up a bit. And inherently, there's going to be some surfaces that you can't see, or there's going to be holes that just can't quite get the laser into deep enough to capture the bottom of, or things like that. So there's going to be a bit of cleanup. You're going to have to fill holes, or you'll have to clean up a little bit of the data. A lot of times fossils are prepared in such a way that they're glued back together and stuff like that. So you end up with shiny surfaces, or some epoxy that's kind of translucent, and it does some weird things with the laser that way. So you have to clean up a bit of noise on the scans. So to put things online so that people can see them on their smartphone, a lot of these models, for example, the Tiktaalik skull it's a pretty small skull. It's about the size, a little bit bigger than a softball, maybe a cantaloupe-sized object. That thing was like 40 million polygons. It's a really dense, heavy scan, and you can't load that on a smartphone. It just crashes the software. So we go through and we optimize those models for web viewing. So we go through and it's called UVs, create UVs for an object, and then we create a series of maps that allow you to put a low resolution model online, but it fakes the detail of having a really high resolution object. Sort of Hollywood and video game magic that people have been using for years in those fields, but trying to integrate those into what we do.
That's cool. So that's kind of like a, what do they call those? A texture map that you put on top of it that shows the little details that you don't necessarily need all the polygons for?
It would be so it's a normal map and a displacement map. A texture map we also do, but that would be for color detail.
Okay. Cool. I've never heard of a normal map before.
So normal maps are, if you look at them without being on an object, they're like kind of look like a rainbow. They're like an oil slick on water. It's a colored thing. It's just a fake map that recreates shadows to give you a look of 3D on an object that doesn't really have surface detail on it. So it's basically a fake shadow map.
Cool. And have you worked on any of the dinosaurs in the area?
We've done quite a bit. I'm working on a research project currently. Since you guys were SVDP, you got to see it, the new Einiosaurus out of Utah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on a research project with that currently that I can't really go into a huge amount of detail about, but
Sure.
I digitized the entire skeleton of that for a project that I'm currently working on.
Cool.
And then there's, I think I'm up to almost 50 dinosaur models from Utah for the Research Quest project, and then various other dinosaurs from around the area, and then scanned a T-Rex from LA County, skull. That's about it. Idaho's not really great for dinosaurs.
Yeah.
It's we've got this weird volcanic state, so most of our dinosaurs are under 60, 70 feet of old lava.
Yeah, we have the same problem in California. Most of the dinosaur fossils you'd find, I think, are up in mountains. You know, they're buried in trees and things too. Dirt.
Right.
Yeah. So since you're also an artist and you have a portfolio on ArtStation and a separate Facebook page, and we didn't talk about it, but the Idaho Virtualization Lab also has a Facebook page for our listeners. And we'll link to all these so you can see for yourselves. But as a paleo artist, what do you specialize in? Like, what are your favorite things to create?
I'm trying to prevent myself from getting hyper specialized. I try to do art in a way that's as broad as possible, so I try and flex out a bit, I guess, if it were. I really like marine animals. I'm a paleoichthyologist. I like the sharks is my main research goal, but I really like just really weird marine critters. So I'm currently working on a Basilosaurus model. It's a big whale from the southeast United States.
Cool.
I really like mixing the 3D with the art. It's really nice being able to digitize a skull and then actually flesh that out in a realistic way instead of just trying to figure out proportions as I'm going based on photos and stuff like that.
So what's your process for creating art?
So one of my coworkers calls it the bubblegum approach. So I use ZBrush, which is a 3D package that's really popular in Hollywood for creating organic 3D models, and it works really well. It's set up to be like a digital clay, so you have a bunch of tools. So it's just like a clay sculptor would use, except I get to cheat and use a symmetry tool, so I can sculpt on both sides of it at the same time without having to go back and do it later.
Cool.
But it's basically just digital clay, so I can glob on extra clay where I need to build up a surface, or I can carve into it where I need to take stuff away, and then basically I just start with a sphere and just keep adding and stretching and pulling and carving and cutting until I get a 3D object. I'm working on a bison latifrons skull right now for the museum, creating one that we can use for various purposes. And I'm recording that process, so I'll be able to post that online to show people kind of how that comes together.
Oh, awesome. Since we, in a lot of these cases, like we know maybe a little bit about the animal, or maybe a lot, but we don't know everything about the animal. So how much liberty do you take with your art? Like how much is interpretation and I guess almost guesswork, and then how much do you usually actually know?
That's a great question. Yeah, paleo art's kind of a weird thing. A lot of the times, a lot of the animals that you're trying to reconstruct don't really have modern analogs, and if they do, they're quite a few million years removed from the animal you're working on. The best thing I can do is dig through the primary research and look at the descriptions that paleontologists have put together of these animals, and then you just kind of fill in the missing pieces from what isn't there. But primarily, I've worked mostly off of actual publications and journals and material where the stuff has been published, and I try and keep it as scientifically based as possible without putting a whole lot of artistic license into it. In the case of the Basilosaurus, there's quite a few of the relatives of that guy that are pretty well described, and we got some pretty good skulls and full body fossils of that. But, to recreate an animal as realistically as possible, it's kind of a tricky thing, but we'll never really know. But at least I have the benefit of most of the stuff I work on still kind of has a modern analog in the world we live in, unlike a dinosaur where we don't have a whole lot of T-Rexes running around.
That's true.
I tend to not do a whole lot of controversial stuff because a whale is a whale and a shark is basically a shark. So I don't have people yelling at me for putting feathers on things or any of that.
Yeah, I could see how marine reptiles or even just other marine animals would be a little bit simpler possibly for art because they all tend to have similar colors and shading, and they're all very smoothed, so it doesn't give you the temptation to add random ornamentation sticking out.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to get into trouble doing stuff like that.
How long have you been working on your art?
About a couple of years now, I think. It was I started doing research, but I find art a nice outlet for that. And then through the helicoprion research, I spent quite a bit of time working with Ray Troll, who's a pretty prominent paleo artist. And he kind of beat me over the head for the 4 or 5 years that I've known him that, you need art to explain your science. You can give a publication to another paleontologist and they can look at graphs and charts and stuff like that and they'll understand what you're talking about. But if you're going to engage the public in a discussion about animals of the past, they need to be able to see that and they need to be able to see and understand what you're talking about. So art becomes a bridge between science and our real world.
Definitely.
We really like to try and blend art and science, which is something we do a lot with our Facebook page for the Idaho Virtualization Lab. Is a bone all by itself isn't that appealing, but if you render it in such a way that it has some dramatic lighting and colors and stuff like that, then it becomes more appealing for the public. That's the goal. Ultimately we're doing it for the public, so we want them to be able to enjoy the material as much as somebody would that's just going to measure it and break it down into a series of numbers.
Yeah. And then an art also, it can shape the way that everybody sees a certain type of animal. Do you ever feel pressure in that way? Okay, maybe it's an animal that there's not much that's been made for it yet, and this is going to be what people think of. Yeah,
there's definitely pressure involved there. In fact, there's another shark that we're currently researching. It's called Edestus. It's related to helicoprion, but instead of a spiral teeth, it has they call it the scissor tooth shark because it has a pair of blades. Has a blade in its upper jaw and a blade in its lower jaw, and they work kind of like a pair of shears. And basically you just find the blades of teeth, and they come out of the coal mines in Kentucky and Illinois. But there's not very much known about them, but luckily we've got another CT scan of the entire skull of one of those sharks. But yeah, if you get the reconstruction wrong, the public tends to latch on to an idea and they cling to that and hold on to it for a long time. So if you make a mistake the first go around, trying to correct that later down the road is problematic because people don't want to let go of what they've got. That's the circles I'm in on Facebook. There's a lot of paleo artists, and I see it with the T-Rex. People really resist the idea of these guys having feathers. They don't.
Oh yeah.
They grew up seeing scaled dinosaurs, and that's their dinosaur. People take it personally. It seems that you're trying to take away a piece of their childhood, basically, by recreating an animal that they grew up loving, and now you've got the whole theropod lip debate, and people really like seeing teeth hanging out of the mouths of theropods. So when you put lips on a T-Rex, people tend to get offended by that.
Yeah.
So there's quite a bit of pressure to get it right the first time.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that could be really great about your interaction with kids and kind of helping them see how the recreation process goes, because it might take some of this emotional effect out of, the public eye of what science is. I don't like that version of science. That's not the science that I knew. It's like, well, that's not what science is. Science always changes. Get used to it.
Yeah, that's a great lesson to teach kids early on. That's science changes. It's a fluid understanding of the world around us. So you have to be a little flexible in your ability to take in new information and change your thought process with it. Kids are great that way. It's really rewarding working with kids. You can see it. You can change their mind inside of a half-hour discussion. But us adults, we get set in our ways and we don't like to change very often. So you gotta get them while they're young.
Yeah, that's true.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned critical thinking too, because that is like my favorite topic for discussion. Cool. So one more question about CT scanning versus these other ones. Do you do CT scanning less often just because it's so cumbersome, or is it because it's harder to do something like a whale skull and there are so many things that are too large to get into a CT scan?
A lot of it is exactly that. It's a size restriction on it. In fact, our Helicoprion fossil was just barely small enough to fit inside the industrial CT machine at Austin. And it's kind of a labor-intensive process. If you just CT scan a skull that's out of matrix, it's not that bad. You can process it pretty well. But if you're dealing with fossils that are inside rock, there's a long time. It's a manual process of extracting that fossil from the rock. So it really takes a long time to do that. The bulk of what we do is digitizing collections. So we push for volume. So we need to be able to produce a high volume of high resolution models in a cost-effective manner.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the laser scanners really come in handy. Is you can crank through in the past we've done tests, and if we put our entire lab on task, we can generate about 300 3D models a week if we just crank on it.
Yeah.
So we can digitize an entire collection pretty quick. In fact, the Tiktaalik collection, for example, had about 300 items in that, and I scanned that entire collection in about a week by myself, and then spent another month or two building the 3D models. But if you were going to CT scan that entire thing, you're looking at a couple of months of CT data collection, and then another probably a year or so of creating 3D models based off of that. Then the public really doesn't care so much about the internal data. They just want to see a cool fossil. So you spend all that time and investment on a thing that somebody's going to see on Sketchfab, and they're going to spin it around a couple of times and then go play around on Farmville or whatever they were going to do.
That's true.
So it's a balancing act. You got to try and find the balance between a research ready model and something that the public is going to be interested in seeing.
Great. So where's the best place for people to find out more about the Virtual Museum of Idaho?
Probably our Facebook page, I would assume. We're pretty bad about social media. And, we forget about Twitter. We've got a Twitter account, but we forget about it. So we tweet about once every 6 months or so. We'll do something there. But Facebook is something we seem to do quite a bit of. So most of our updates go there. And then the Idaho Museum of Natural History has a website, and that's updated pretty regularly. But we have the Virtual Museum of Idaho, which I don't think there's any way to filter for new content, but we're constantly adding new material to that. So there's always stuff going. And then, of course, there's Sketchfab. So we add content to Sketchfab, and then we integrate that into our virtual museum website. So Sketchfab gives you kind of the opportunity to see it first, and you get that notification letting you know that we've added something new.
Cool. And is that just for our listeners to know, if they go to Sketchfab, they can just search Virtual Museum of Idaho?
Idaho Virtualization Lab.
Idaho Virtualization Lab. Okay, great. And we'll be posting all these links, but just in case for the people who might only be listening. All right, so we have just one last question that we ask everybody. What is your favorite dinosaur?
I'm an Ankylosaur guy. I'd have to go with an Ankylosaur. I don't think they get quite enough love in the paleo world.
That's my favorite too.
Awesome. Well, good. You'll probably enjoy the research I'm going to be kicking out hopefully in the next year or so.
Awesome.
I definitely will. I might have to try to 3D print it or something.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Jesse. That was a great interview. And now on to our dinosaur of the day, Einiosaurus, whose name means buffalo wizard. And that name is a combination of the Blackfeet word Eini, which means buffalo, and ancient Greek saurus. It was a centrosaurian ceratopsian that lived in the Cretaceous in what is now Montana, and it was named in 1995 by Scott Sampson. The type species is Einiosaurus procurvicornis, and the species name means with a forward curving horn. It was found in 2 bone beds, at least 15 individuals of different ages with 3 adult skulls and hundreds of other bones. Jack Horner found the bone beds in 1985, and they were excavated between 85 and 89 by field crews from the Museum of the Rockies. The bone beds may be a result of a bunch of Einiosaurus around a water hole that was decreasing in size during a dry season, so they may have died from drought, or it's possible that they drowned while trying to cross a river.
It's funny that those are 2 likely things and they're exact opposites in every way.
Just shows how much we know.
Yeah.
So originally the bone beds were thought to have a new species of Styracosaurus, and the name Styracosaurus macaulay was published in 1990 but with no description, so it's an invalid nomen nudum. Jack Horner found 3 species in the bone beds and referred to them as type A, B, and C, and then Scott Sampson described type B in 1995 and named that one Einiosaurus. It may have been a herding animal. This is based on being found in bone beds. It was an herbivore, about 14.8 feet or 4.7 meters long and weighing 1.3 tons. It had a narrow pointed snout with a downward curving nasal horn that looks like a bottle opener, though that may only be in some adults.
Somebody needs to make a bottle opener out of this.
That would be great. Their horns grew larger with age. In 2010, Julie Resner studied individuals found at the Dino Ridge site and found Einiosaurus rapidly grew until it was 3 to 5 years old, and then it grew much more slowly, probably when it became sexually mature. The nasal horn was covered in a sheath, and it had large, rounded scales over its eyes based on a 2009 reconstruction of the skin and horn on ceratopsids by Tobin, Hieronymus, and colleagues. It had a pair of large spikes that projected backwards from its small frill, and the horns over the eyes were low and short. It had a short frill on its neck compared to chasmosaurian ceratopsians like Chasmosaurus, and it had smaller horns on the outside edges of the neck frill. It was probably used for display, though it may have helped protect it against tyrannosaurids like Gorgosaurus and Daspletosaurus. It had a sharp beak that could shear through plants, and it had a battery of teeth to help eat tough plant material. And all known Einiosaurus fossils are currently at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana. So, again, it was a ceratopsian, and ceratopsians were ornithischians. They lived in North America and Asia, and they had beaks and cheek teeth to eat fibrous vegetation. And they also had a frill that may have been used for defense, regulating body temperature, attracting mates, or signaling danger. And they probably traveled in herds and could then stampede if threatened.
That'd be handy. And our fun fact of the day is that there are 2 dinosaurs that were named after Michael Crichton. The first one is Cedrorestes crichtoni, which literally means cedar mountain dweller, and it's either an iguanodontian or a hadrosaur, and it was found in the Cedar Mountain Formation. You might be able to guess where its genus name comes from now, along with Utahraptor and Gastonia. So, pretty interesting group of dinosaurs in that Cedar Mountain. The other is Crichtonosaurus bolini, and that means Crichton's lizard. Pretty good one. It's a small ankylosaur, but unfortunately the few remains that were assigned to this species aren't unique, so it's likely a dubious genus.
Bummer.
So we need a new Crichtonosaurus. That's what I think.
Could happen.
Although I don't know if you can name a new, like if there's a dubious genus, can you reuse that genus name? I don't know. Maybe not. That'd be too bad.
That could be a future fun fact.
There needs to be a Crichtonosaurus, though. Maybe you could have a Michaelosaurus. That doesn't sound as good, though.
Also, which Michael are you referring to?
Yeah, that's true.
And on that note, that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thanks for listening. If you want to help support us, keep this podcast going, then please join our growing community on Patreon at patreon.com/iknowdino. Thanks again, and until next time.
Thank you for listening to I Know Dino. If you have any questions or comments about dinosaurs, we'd like to hear from you at plesiosaur@iknowdino.com. And for more information on dinosaurs, go to iknowdino.com or follow us on Google, Facebook, Tumblr, or Twitter at I Know Dino.